The morning mist clung to the cliffs like a silken veil, rolling in from the restless sea that never slept. Atop these cliffs, the Whitmore estate stood like a silent sentinel, its tall windows reflecting a world that had forgotten how to smile. Inside, in a sunlit drawing room filled with the scent of old wood and faint lavender, a young girl sat on a velvet chaise, her small fingers entwined around a well-worn bear that had lost most of its stuffing. Her name was Alara, and for as long as anyone could remember, the world believed she was blind. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, held an emptiness that unsettled those who gazed upon her. But for her father, that emptiness was a fragile shield he clung to with every fiber of his being. Nathaniel Whitmore, once a man whose name was whispered in literary circles as a brilliant storyteller, now moved through his home with the heavy steps of a man who had lost the rhythm of life. His wife had been gone for years, taken in an accident, too cruel to recount even in whispered memories, and in her absence, the estate had become a mausoleum of sorrow, echoing with silence. Alara had been born just days before that tragedy, and in Nathaniel's eyes, she had been both a miracle and a reminder of loss. He rose each morning with mechanical precision, preparing a breakfast of dry toast and strong tea, always placing 2 cups at the long oak table, one for himself, one for Alara, though the girl rarely spoke. Often, he would watch her tiny hands trace the edges of the table as if memorizing every groove, every imperfection, and he would wonder if she felt the world more keenly than she let on. After breakfast, he dressed her carefully, fastening buttons, and brushing her golden hair with a tenderness that betrayed a heart still raw from grief. Alara rarely responded to words. She would sit quietly, humming soft melodies only she could hear. And Nathaniel had long accepted that her silence was part of the rhythm of his new life. The windows of the estate looked out over the cliffs to the sea below, but the light they poured into the drawing room seemed to only emphasize the shadows in Nathaniel's heart. Even when he described the color of the wildflowers that grew along the cliffs, or the shape of clouds scudding across the sky, she would nod faintly, her eyes never following the words. And yet, there was something in the way her fingers lingered on the petals of a bloom, or the gentle tilt of her head when the church bells rang, that suggested perhaps the world was not as silent as he believed. The staff of the estate were careful and discreet, accustomed to the quiet solemnity of the house. They whispered among themselves only in hushed tones, sharing rumors that Nathaniel refused to entertain. Some claimed they had seen Alara smile when the morning sun hit the glass panes just so, or that she had hummed along to music that only she could hear. Nathaniel dismissed it all, afraid that any hope might shatter the fragile equilibrium of his world. Yet, life has a way of revealing truths that even the most careful hearts cannot hide. On a gray afternoon, when the wind tore across the cliffs with the ferocity of the sea below, a new presence entered the estate. Mara, the maid, young but keen-eyed, moved through the halls with a quiet confidence that seemed almost at odds with the hushed despair of the home. She noticed things others did not, the way Alara's head turned slightly toward the sound of her footsteps, or how the girl's hands would linger on a sunbeam that fell just across the floor. Mara's curiosity was gentle, but insistent, a quiet force that would not be denied. That evening, as the storm raged outside and the waves struck the cliffs with relentless fury, Nathaniel sat in his study, the typewriter before him collecting dust while Alara played silently in the drawing room. Mara approached the girl with a small, folded piece of paper in hand, a delicate smile on her face. "Alara," she whispered, kneeling beside her, "do you want to see something beautiful?" The words hung in the air like a fragile promise, and in that moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. Nathaniel, hearing the soft exchange, felt a prickle of unease, a mixture of hope and fear that he could not name. He had lived his life, believing in her blindness, protecting her from a world he thought might crush her fragile spirit. Yet Mara's gentle insistence hinted at something more, a secret hidden beneath the surface of years, spent in shadow. As Mara unfolded the paper, Alara's fingers reached toward it with certainty, tracing shapes that seemed impossibly familiar. Her lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile, and Nathaniel felt his chest tighten, a knot of fear and hope entangling together. for the first time. He wondered if the truth he had long denied might finally step into the light. And it was a truth that would change everything about his daughter, about himself, and about the quiet house perched on the cliffs that had held so many secrets for so long outside. The storm began to ease, and a single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the drawing room in a golden glow. Alara looked up, and her eyes bright, clear, and unafraid met Nathaniel's. The world seemed to pause, suspended between what had been believed and what was now undeniable. And in that pause, he realized that life had been waiting for this moment all along, a moment when courage, love, and the relentless pursuit of truth would finally converge. Alara's smile lingered in Nathaniel's mind long after the sunlight faded from the drawing room. He returned to his study that evening with a heaviness that felt different from grief, something fragile, yet electric, a flutter of anticipation he had not experienced in years. Mara quietly followed, carrying a small tray of tea, but her eyes betrayed a purpose beyond mere service. She had noticed what no one else had, seen what had been hidden beneath years of assumptions and silence. The night settled over the estate with a velvet hush, broken only by the soft crackle of the fireplace and the distant roll of waves against the cliffs. Nathaniel sat in his armchair, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls, wondering how he had been so blind for so long, blind to the subtle truths of his own daughter. He had wrapped himself in the cocoon of her supposed blindness, never daring to imagine that the world might be brighter than he had allowed it to be. Mara approached the study quietly, the tray of tea in her hands trembling just slightly. "Sir," she said softly, "there's something you should see." Nathaniel looked up, startled. Her voice carried a calm authority, the kind that demanded attention without force. "It's about Alara." For a moment, he felt the old surge of fear. Could it be that she had been hurt again? That some cruel twist had left her even more vulnerable than he believed? But the look in Mara's eyes held no malice, only certainty, and a hint of wonder. Nathaniel set down his cup, rising slowly, his heart caught between trepidation and a hope he dared not name. In the drawing room, Mara had placed a small, ornate mirror on the floor, angled just so. "Alara," she called gently, "look here." The girl hesitated, her small hands brushing the edges of her bare, then leaned forward. Nathaniel held his breath, every muscle tense. Mara guided Alara's hands to the mirror, and for the first time in all his years of protective certainty, Nathaniel witnessed a movement that froze him in place. Alara's fingers traced the reflections not as if they were foreign shapes, but with familiarity, precision, and awe. Her head tilted, a soft gasp escaping her lips, and she whispered a word Nathaniel had never expected: light. It was a single word, simple, yet it shattered the walls of the life he had meticulously built around her imagined limitations. Mara watched quietly, allowing the moment to unfold. "You've seen it all along, haven't you?" she murmured, more to herself than to Alara. The girl looked up at her, eyes wide, shimmering with something beyond description, a joy so pure that it brought tears unbidden to Nathaniel's eyes. He stumbled forward, voice trembling. "Alara, you can see?" The girl nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, her lips curved into a radiant smile, a reflection of a world Nathaniel had never allowed himself to imagine for her. The revelation struck him like a tide crashing against the cliffs below, sudden, powerful, and utterly transformative. For all these years, he had sheltered her, believed he was protecting her, when in truth, the world had been within her grasp all along. Silence filled the room, broken only by the occasional crack of the fire and the distant call of the sea. Nathaniel sank into the armchair, overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions: relief, guilt, wonder, and a deep, aching love that seemed to grow heavier and lighter all at once. Mara knelt beside him, her hand brushing his shoulder with a quiet reassurance. "It's never too late, sir," she said softly. "She's ready, and so are you." For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt a stirring of purpose. The estate no longer seemed a mausoleum of loss, but a sanctuary of possibility. He realized that life had not abandoned them. It had merely waited, patiently, for the right moment to unfold its truths. And in that waiting, it had crafted a miracle more profound than any he could have imagined. The next morning, the Whitmore estate awoke to a soft golden light that spilled across the cliffs. Nathaniel found himself guiding Alara through the gardens, his hands trembling as he pointed out the colors of the flowers, the flight of the birds, the endless sweep of the sea. She turned to him with laughter in her eyes, a sound that seemed to brighten the entire world. Every step she took was a revelation, each movement a triumph over the years they had both spent under the shadow of misconception. Mara followed at a respectful distance, watching the two of them, her heart swelling with the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had been part of something extraordinary. She had unearthed a secret that was never meant to harm, but to liberate, a truth that had been buried under layers of fear and grief. And now, with patience and courage, she had given them a gift that could never be taken away, the realization that love, when guided by faith and understanding, could illuminate even the darkest corners of life. That evening, Nathaniel stood once again in his study, but the atmosphere was transformed. The walls no longer whispered sorrow. They sang of hope. Alara sat at his side, describing in excited tones the vivid hues of the sunset, the delicate shimmer of the waves, the soft patterns of the clouds above. And as he listened, Nathaniel understood that the story of their lives was no longer a tale of loss, but one of discovery, resilience, and the boundless power of truth. Outside, the cliffs caught the final light of day, golden and fierce against the darkening sea. Nathaniel knew that the days ahead would not be without challenges, but he also knew something far more important, that the courage to see, to believe, and to embrace the unexpected could transform not only a single life, but an entire world. And as he watched Alara dance among the wildflowers, Mara quietly closing the door behind her, he realized that this was only the beginning, a prologue to a story of hope, wonder, and unshakable love that had been waiting all along to be told. The days that followed were unlike any Nathaniel had ever known. The Whitmore estate, once cloaked in shadows and quiet despair, now seemed alive with possibility. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting the drawing room in gold, while the scent of blooming gardens drifted in on the gentle breeze. Alara moved through the house with a confidence that seemed to surprise even herself, her laughter echoing like a song long forgotten. Nathaniel watched her from the study doorway, heart swelling with pride and disbelief. He had spent years protecting a child he believed fragile, only to discover that her spirit had been stronger than he could have imagined. Mara, ever attentive, guided both father and daughter with a careful hand. She encouraged Alara to explore not just the gardens, but the entire estate, the library with its towering shelves, the art gallery that had long gathered dust, the secret paths along the cliffs that Nathaniel himself had feared to tread. With each small adventure, the bond between father and daughter deepened, and Nathaniel began to see that his own fear had been the greatest barrier to their happiness. One afternoon, as the sea churned below the cliffs and gulls wheeled in the salt-scented wind, Mara suggested they try something bold. "Alara," she said gently, "there is a place at the edge of the cliffs where the sun touches the water, just before it disappears. I think you should see it." Nathaniel hesitated, a shadow of worry crossing his face. The cliffs were steep, the paths treacherous, and he had always feared the world outside the estate's safe confines. But Alara's eyes sparkled with anticipation, her small hand reaching for his. With Mara leading the way, they climbed the worn stone steps to the top of the bluff. The wind tugged at their clothes, whipping Alara's hair around her face, but she held her father's hand tightly, unafraid. As they emerged onto the open cliff, the horizon unfolded in a panorama of colors Nathaniel had only dreamed of describing in his old novels. The sun, a molten orb, kissed the edge of the ocean, scattering light across waves that gleamed like liquid gold. Alara gasped, her tiny hands reaching outward as if to capture the brilliance itself. "Is it real?" she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. Nathaniel knelt beside her, words failing him as he watched the wonder in her eyes. For years, he had described the world to her with careful precision, imagining that she would never see it. Now, the truth unfolded before them, both, an unspoken miracle that made every moment of sorrow worthwhile. Mara smiled softly, stepping back to allow the father and daughter to share this discovery together. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel began to shed the weight of his past in ways he had never thought possible. He taught Alara to read books not just with her hands, but with her eyes, showing her the intricate illustrations and the vibrant colors he had always described in words. They wandered through the estate, discovering hidden corners and forgotten treasures, each moment a small victory over the shadows that had long dominated their lives. Mara observed silently, knowing that the revelation of Alara's sight had unlocked something far greater, the courage to embrace life fully, without fear. But as with all stories of transformation, challenges were never far behind. One evening, a letter arrived at the estate, its seal unfamiliar. Nathaniel opened it cautiously, and his face paled as he read. The letter bore news of a distant relative, a man who had long coveted the Whitmore fortune and held resentment toward Nathaniel's late wife. The contents hinted at disputes, claims, and potential threats to the estate and intrusion that could unravel the fragile peace they had built. Nathaniel's first instinct was to hide this from Alara, to protect her as he had always done. Yet, he hesitated, seeing the determination in her eyes, the spark of awareness that told him she was ready to face the world. Mara sensed his internal conflict. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "sometimes protection is not about keeping them safe from the world, but giving them the strength to stand within it." Her words struck him with the clarity of lightning. He realized that the very thing he had feared exposing Alara to the uncertainties and dangers of life was exactly what she needed to grow, to understand, and to claim her place in the world. The next morning, Nathaniel and Alara stood together at the edge of the cliffs, the wind tugging at their clothes as if urging them forward. "We will face this together," he said, his voice steady for the first time in years. Alara nodded, her gaze unwavering, her fingers gripping his hand with quiet determination. Mara watched from the shadows of the garden path, her heart swelling with pride. She had uncovered a truth hidden for years, but now she witnessed something even more extraordinary, a father and daughter ready to confront life not as victims of circumstance, but as champions of their own story. That night, as the waves crashed endlessly against the cliffs below, Nathaniel returned to his study with a sense of purpose he had long thought lost. He placed a new sheet of paper into the typewriter and began to write, not a story of sorrow, but a tale of courage, resilience, and discovery. Alara, meanwhile, fell asleep in her bed with the faintest smile on her lips, dreaming not of shadows, but of light, colors, and a world that was finally hers to explore. And as the estate lay bathed in moonlight, a quiet promise lingered in the air that no matter the challenges to come, no matter the storms that threatened to rise, the bond between father and daughter, strengthened by truth and guided by love, would remain unbroken. For in this house perched above the relentless sea, they had discovered something far greater than wealth, status, or legacy. They had discovered the power of seeing, truly seeing, and the courage to live without fear. The following days were marked by a restless energy that Nathaniel had long forgotten. The estate, usually steeped in serene routines, now hummed with anticipation, curiosity, and a quiet determination. Alara moved through it with a grace and confidence that astonished everyone who saw her. Each step she took, each laugh that rang through the halls, seemed to awaken corners of the house that had slept in shadows for decades. Mara watched from her post with a careful eye, knowing that the revelation of Alara's sight had ignited something far beyond perception. It had ignited courage. Nathaniel, too, felt a shift within himself. The looming threat from the distant relative still weighed on him, but rather than sinking into fear, he found his mind sharpening, his resolve hardening. He began preparing, not just to defend the estate, but to teach Alara the strength she would need to stand firm in the face of challenges. He realized that life was no longer about sheltering her, but about guiding her to embrace the world boldly, without hesitation or doubt. One morning, as the sun rose over the cliffs in a haze of gold and amber, Mara led Alara to a secluded part of the estate's gardens that Nathaniel had rarely allowed her to explore. It was a hidden courtyard, overgrown with wild flowers and ivy, where the sea breeze mingled with the scent of earth and blossoms. Mara knelt beside her and whispered, "Here, Alara, you can feel the world fully, listen, touch, and learn. Every sense is a story waiting for you. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind play through her hair and the scents of the garden fill her senses. Then, slowly, deliberately, she opened her eyes and took in the scene. The colors were vivid, the textures rich, and the light danced on the leaves and petals in a symphony of brilliance. Nathaniel watched from a distance, a lump forming in his throat as he witnessed her first true moment of unrestrained wonder. It was as if the world itself had opened its arms to her, and she had stepped willingly into its embrace. Yet, even as the family reveled in these moments of joy and discovery, the shadow of the letter loomed over them. Days later, a carriage arrived at the estate gates, carrying a man whose presence was as imposing as the cliffs themselves. He introduced himself with polite but icy words, and Nathaniel's heart sank. This was the relative who had long coveted the Whitmore fortune, a man who seemed to measure worth in wealth and power alone. He had come with claims, questions, and a subtle menace that Nathaniel could not ignore. Lara, however, approached him with curiosity rather than fear. She studied his posture, the tone of his voice, the faint lines of worry and tension that creased his face, and in her gaze, there was no hesitation. Nathaniel felt a surge of pride and an equal measure of anxiety. This encounter would be their first real test, a confrontation that would challenge everything they had built in the quiet sanctuary of the estate. As they sat in the drawing room that evening, the relative making thinly veiled threats while Nathaniel listened, Mara stood silently behind Alara, a steady presence, guiding without intruding. The girl, who had once been thought blind, now saw clearly not only with her eyes, but with her heart. She sensed the tension in the room, the weight of expectations, and she responded with a quiet wisdom that belied her years. "You cannot take what we have," she said softly, her voice carrying a calm authority. "This house, this family, is built on love and truth. Those are things no one can steal." Nathaniel felt a mixture of awe and relief. For so long, he had feared the world would crush her, that circumstances beyond their control would define her life. But in that moment, he understood that true strength came not from protection alone, but from teaching her to stand unafraid. Mara's eyes glimmered with quiet satisfaction. She had uncovered a truth far greater than any secret. She had witnessed the birth of courage. That night, the wind howled along the cliffs, shaking the windows and rattling the doors, but within the Whitmore estate, there was a new kind of peace. Nathaniel and Alara sat together by the fireplace, their hands intertwined, while Mara quietly tended to the household. The firelight reflected in Alara's eyes, revealing a determination that seemed to shine brighter than the flames. Nathaniel knew that challenges would come, that life's storms were far from over, but he also knew that they had discovered a strength that could withstand any tempest. As the moon rose over the ocean, casting silver light across the cliffs, Alara whispered to her father, "We can face anything together, can't we?" Nathaniel nodded, his voice steady, filled with conviction he had not felt in years. "Yes, my love. Together, we can face everything." Mara watched them from the doorway, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips, knowing that the revelation she had helped uncover was only the beginning. The story of the Whitmore family was far from over, and the best chapters were still to come, a tale of resilience, love, and the unyielding power of truth that would continue to unfold with each passing day. Outside, the sea roared against the cliffs, relentless and wild, yet the estate remained a sanctuary, a place where courage had been born and fear had been tamed. The winds of challenge might howl, but within these walls, a family had discovered a strength that would carry them through anything. And as Nathaniel looked at his daughter, eyes shimmering with clarity and wisdom, he realized that the greatest journey of all had only just begun. The days following the relative's visit brought a restless tension that settled over the estate. Like a persistent fog, Nathaniel moved through the halls with a purposeful stride, yet a quiet unease tugged at his mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, seemed amplified in the silence of the estate. He had long feared life's uncertainties, but now, with Alara fully seeing the world around her, those uncertainties took on a sharper edge. It was no longer just about protecting her from shadows. It was about preparing her for a world that would challenge her in ways he could scarcely predict. Alara, however, seemed undaunted. Her laughter still rang through the halls, her curiosity guiding her through every corner of the estate, and her eyes sparkled with a clarity that made Nathaniel both proud and anxious. Mara watched her closely, understanding that the girl's newfound vision was not merely physical, it was a revelation of spirit, a confidence that could face the storm and rise above it. She had witnessed countless children, but none like Alara. There was a resilience in her, a quiet strength that had been hidden beneath years of misconception. One morning, Mara suggested an outing beyond the familiar gardens. "There's a path through the woods that leads to a waterfall," she said. "It's dangerous, but beautiful. It will teach her to trust herself and the world around her." Nathaniel hesitated. The path was steep, winding, and treacherous in places. Yet, looking at Alara's eager expression, he realized that shielding her now would do more harm than good. Courage, he understood, was nurtured through experience, not avoidance. They set off, the wind guiding them through the whispering trees, sunlight filtering through the branches in shimmering patterns. Alara led the way, her small hand occasionally brushing against Nathaniel's for reassurance, but moving forward with a confidence he had never imagined. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they approached the waterfall, a natural symphony that vibrated through the forest, blending with the rustle of leaves and the distant cries of birds. Mara walked silently behind, her presence steady and reassuring. When they reached the waterfall, Alara froze for a moment, eyes wide in awe. The water cascaded down in a silvery curtain, catching the sunlight in 1,000 sparkling fragments. She reached out instinctively, letting the mist touch her skin, a smile spreading across her face. Nathaniel felt tears sting his eyes. Here was his daughter, seeing the world in all its raw beauty, unafraid and unshackled by the limitations he had once believed defined her. As they made their way back to the estate, Nathaniel reflected on the past months, the grief, the silence, the fear, and now, the revelation that had transformed their lives. Each day, Alara grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. Her laughter, her curiosity, and her unyielding courage began to inspire him in ways he had never anticipated. The estate, once a place of mourning and restraint, had become a living testament to resilience, a sanctuary where love and truth could flourish. Yet, the arrival of the relative loomed like a shadow in the background. Nathaniel knew that peace was fragile, and that the world beyond the estate's gates could be unforgiving. There would be challenges, confrontations, and tests of their courage and integrity. Mara's presence provided reassurance, but Nathaniel realized that the ultimate responsibility rested with him and with Alara. She had the vision now, both literally and metaphorically, and with it came the power to navigate life's obstacles with clarity and determination. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a letter arrived, unmarked and without warning. Nathaniel opened it cautiously, his heart tightening as he read. The contents were vague, but the message was clear. Someone had taken interest in the estate, someone who saw opportunity in their vulnerability. The words hinted at challenges that would test not just their courage, but their unity as a family. Nathaniel looked at Alara, who sat nearby, her eyes bright with understanding. She did not flinch, nor did she waver. There was a quiet strength in her gaze, an acknowledgement that they would face whatever came together. Mara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "They will come," she said, "but you are ready. The truth has given you power. Trust in it and in each other." Nathaniel nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential trials and hidden dangers, but he understood now that fear was no longer their guide. Courage was, resilience was, and love unwavering, steadfast love would carry them through. As night fell, the estate lay under a blanket of stars, the cliffs silhouetted against the shimmering sea. Nathaniel stood at the window, watching the waves crash relentlessly below, a mirror to the challenges that awaited. But in his heart, he carried a certainty that had eluded him for years. They were prepared. Alara's vision, Mara's guidance, and his own awakening courage had created a shield stronger than any fortress. The story of the Whitmore family was evolving, moving toward a destiny shaped not by fear, but by strength, hope, and the enduring power of truth. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of the ocean, Nathaniel knew that the coming days would demand everything they had. Yet, for the first time in his life, he faced the future not with trepidation, but with anticipation. For he had discovered a truth greater than any secret, any fear, or any obstacle: the courage to see, to act, and to embrace life fully, no matter what storms might come. The morning sun broke over the cliffs with a brilliance that seemed to promise renewal, and for the first time in years, the Whitmore estate felt like a place of triumph rather than shadow. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the veranda, his eyes sweeping across the vast expanse of ocean, cliffs, and gardens that had become a testament to resilience. Alara ran ahead of him, her laughter ringing clear and free, echoing off the walls of the estate and blending with the sound of gulls wheeling above the waves. She had grown in ways even he had not imagined, her spirit as unyielding as the cliffs themselves. The letter from the stranger, the distant relative who sought to unsettle their peace, had arrived weeks ago, yet Nathaniel had not responded. Instead, he had chosen to fortify their strength, not with walls or threats, but with truth, courage, and unity. Mara had guided them patiently, allowing each challenge to become a lesson, each shadow to reveal the light hidden within. Nathaniel realized that protection did not come from hiding the world's dangers, but from teaching his daughter to face them with clarity and confidence. That afternoon, a carriage approached the estate gates. Nathaniel's heart quickened not with fear, but with awareness. The distant relative had arrived. Intent on asserting claims and testing their resolve, Alara ran to Nathaniel's side, eyes bright, fingers gripping his hand. Mara positioned herself near the doorway, calm and vigilant. Together, they faced the approaching carriage with a quiet certainty. Nathaniel felt a surge of pride. No longer was his daughter fragile or dependent. She had grown into someone capable of confronting the world with unwavering courage. The man who stepped from the carriage was imposing, his presence commanding the air around him. He spoke with formal politeness, but the tension in his words hinted at ambition and entitlement. Nathaniel welcomed him into the drawing room, gesturing toward Alara. The girl stood tall, her posture confident, her eyes meeting his with an unspoken strength that seemed to disarm him before a word had been exchanged. "You see," Nathaniel said softly, his voice steady, "this house has always been more than bricks and walls. It has been built on truth, courage, and love. Those are not things you can claim, nor can they be taken from us." Alara's eyes sparkled, and she added, "And we will face every challenge together. You cannot break what is unshakable." The relative paused, caught off guard by the conviction radiating from the father and daughter. He had expected fear, hesitation, or weakness, but there was none. There was only strength, resilience, and a unity forged through hardship and truth. Slowly, his expression softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. He realized that the Whitmore family had discovered something far greater than wealth or status: the power of love, courage, and unwavering integrity. Weeks passed, and the presence of the relative became a catalyst rather than a threat. Through careful discussion, mutual respect, and a willingness to confront fears together, Nathaniel, Alara, and Mara found themselves growing stronger, their bonds deepening in ways that no isolation could have ever achieved. The estate, once a place of mourning and shadows, now thrived as a haven of light, laughter, and discovery. Alara explored every corner of her world with renewed wonder. She climbed the cliffs, chased the waves along the shore, and wandered through the gardens, learning to see not just with her eyes, but with her heart. Nathaniel joined her, guiding her, laughing with her, and rediscovering joy in ways he had thought lost forever. Mara, watching quietly, knew that the secret she had uncovered, the revelation of Alara's sight, had become the spark that ignited a transformation far beyond anything she could have imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet, Nathaniel and Alara stood together on the cliffs. The wind tugged at their clothes and hair, but they did not flinch. "We've come so far," Nathaniel said softly, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you see how strong you've become?" Alara nodded, her eyes reflecting both the fading sunlight and a determination that seemed to hold the promise of endless possibilities. Mara approached quietly, her presence grounding and serene. "Strength is not just in seeing the world," she said, "but in facing it, in embracing it fully, and in holding on to truth even when it is difficult. You have learned this, both of you, and nothing can take it away." Nathaniel looked at Mara with gratitude, realizing that she had been more than a guide. She had been a catalyst, helping them uncover a power within themselves they had never known existed. That night, the estate rested under a blanket of stars, the waves crashing endlessly against the cliffs as if heralding the courage, love, and resilience within its walls. Nathaniel sat in his study, the typewriter before him once again, and began to write not tales of sorrow or isolation, but stories of triumph, hope, and inspiration. Alara slept nearby, dreaming not of darkness, but of light, discovery, and a life unbound by fear. And as the moonlight touched the estate, casting silver paths across the gardens and halls, Nathaniel understood something he had never truly grasped before. Life's greatest challenges could be met, its deepest sorrows overcome, and its most hidden truths revealed. All it required was courage, faith, and the unbreakable bond of love, for in their journey, they had discovered not just the power to see, but the power to live fully, to embrace every moment, and to transform hardship into strength. The cliffs, the sea, and the estate bore witness to their transformation. Nathaniel, Alara, and Mara had not only survived the trials that had tested them, but they had thrived. They had uncovered truths, faced adversities, and emerged stronger, their hearts and spirits intertwined. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, it promised a future filled with possibility, hope, and the certainty that no obstacle, no matter how daunting, could diminish the power of courage, truth, and love.